Welcome, and thank you for joining the Wildfire Town Hall. I'm Crystal Cotty, Director of Communications for the City of Bee Cave. I've got Mayor Kara King here with us. We also have Chief Robert Abbott with LTFR and Wildfire Mitigation Specialist Dustin Dunn. So thank you all for joining us. This is a series that Mayor King does on Facebook Live. We want to make things easy and accessible to our community. And it just so happened that wildfires are the topic that we're focused on today. Given that we have a red flag warning in effect, the timing worked out nicely, but we're not doing this because of the red flag warning. We were doing this and we planned this more than a month ago. But Chief Abbott, while we've got you, how is it looking out there today? Were there any wildfires, and what can you tell the public about today's red flag warning?
A red flag warning indicates that conditions are prime for a wildfire, and there's criteria that's established by the state of Texas. It takes in consideration moisture content, relative humidity, winds, and in certain areas there can be other elements dealing with topography and other things. Today, thankfully, we have not had any large fires in our local community in and around the city or the unincorporated areas in Northwest Austin. There have been a couple trash fires and so forth, but not related directly to wildland concerns.
That's good news. Now, unfortunately, though, our community has had to deal with wildfires going back to 2011 with the Steiner Ranch and the Spicewood fires. A lot of lessons learned. I think that's a good starting point for our conversation today, because there were a lot of things that the city, that LTFR, the local government learned from that and have improved upon. So let's see if I can go to my next slide here. All right. So what we have here is a map that I wanted to share and kind of help structure our conversation around. So I hear a lot of people talk about wildland urban interface. And so let's start with what exactly the wildland urban interface is, Chief Abbott, and why is it such an important issue here in Bee Cave?
Well, the simplest way to describe it would be where the communities, the homesteads, specifically where we're all living, whether it be in homes or apartments or even retail and commercial, butt up against the vegetation, whether that's state-owned, whether it's federally owned, privately owned, whatever it is, the vegetation that our communities are butting up against. And it's the interface in between where our growing communities meet the vegetation and the wooded areas, the simplest form of what WUI is. When we look back on the Steiner Ranch fires of 2011, we have learned a lot of lessons relating to specifically how communities are developed. The fire code situation here, it only went into effect. We've only had fire codes in our community since 2006. That means any subdivision or any community built before that were not built to the same codes that a community and a subdivision would be approved on today. And that requires us to look at each community slightly differently. One of the biggest issues that come out of that is how close in proximity people are allowed to build up to the vegetation without barriers being put in place, or residential sprinklers being put in the homes, or second means of egress put into some communities, depending how large they are. So going back to all our communities in this district that we serve, which is about 104 square miles, that includes Bee Cave, a good portion of the city was built before the fire codes. Now, there are building codes that were in place, but the fire codes didn't come in until the early to about 2006, 2007. Since then, the fire department has been working with all the cities to enforce those fire codes, and we also have fire codes in the unincorporated area. Some of those areas are ETJs of Austin or further out beyond the ETJs. That's important because when we talk about the interface and what we're tending with either Steiner or Bee Cave, we have to look at every area slightly differently to the specific risk factors and hazards specific to that neighborhood. Well, you may have one city that's got 4 or 5 different neighborhoods. They all have individual needs. And when we look at fire risk and the things that we've learned from the 2011 fires, things like home hardening, our vegetation, our HOAs have also developed over the years. It's very important to understand we can't have the discussion of FireWise and reducing risk without talking about public policy and also some of the other tools that we use to reduce the risk in and outside of these communities that have been on the books for a long time.
Yeah, and Chief, a little bit later, we're going to get into fire insurance and some of the different factors involved with that. So I want people to know that is coming.
Sure.
But with Steiner in particular, I lived not too far away when that happened in 2011, and it was the evacuations that it was an all call, all at the same time, evacuations, 22,000 people trying to get out at the same time, others trying to get back in, understandably, to get pets and loved ones. Mayor, I want to ask you, I mean, what have we learned from that in terms of notifications and alerting people, and then also how we do evacuations and phasing them?
Right. So luckily we haven't had to do an evacuation yet in Bee Cave, but I feel like Bee Cave has been very proactive in thinking what if, right? We've looked at our neighboring communities and said, what can we do? What if? And one of the things that we did do was get the Voyant Alert app as a city. If you don't have Voyant, you can go to your app store. You can download the Voyant app. It's very important that you don't just put in a zip code, but you put in your full address. The full address allows Crystal, as the controller of the Voyant Alert system, if she needs to alert just a neighborhood or just a certain section of the city. The last thing we want to do, and everyone knows, Bee Cave is sandwiched between 620 and 71. 2 lanes each direction on those 2 highways. That is not a lot of room if the whole city starts to panic. So if we need to get one area out, that alert is going to go to that one area and let those people do what they need to do before the whole city gets on the roadways and prevents the one area that needs to get out of the roadways from doing so. So it's really important that you geolocate that app to your exact address so we can find you and send you very targeted alerts.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the questions that was sent in advance was, who is that Voyant Alert going to come from, and how does that decision get made? So I think now's a good time to kind of address that piece of it. So as the mayor said, a Voyant Alert, if it were a Bee Cave evacuation in a Bee Cave neighborhood, that Voyant Alert would come from the city of Bee Cave. As the communications director, I would send that out to the targeted area. Voyant allows you to get very, very targeted if we have your full address. Now, if there's an unincorporated area that's included in that evacuation, that's where we start relying on our regional alert system, which is Warren Central Texas. Travis County, the county we all live in, manages Warren Central Texas. So to answer the question of the community member, it's very important that you are subscribed to Warren Central Texas, as well as the Voyant Alert system. The city of Lakeway also has a Voyant system set up. And a PIO, communications director, who manages that as well. So that gives us coverage as far as our evacuations and notifications.
Yeah, and I just want to add, if you're watching from even outside this area, in my conversations with other cities across the United States are doing these apps and these emergency notification systems. So check in with your city, go to your local city or county website, find out what their specific app notification system is, get subscribed, and put in all your contact information. It's not a spamming service, I promise. It's important.
One of the lessons learned. Now, I want to take us to this slide now, where we talk about the types of fuel reduction. Now, what does fuel reduction mean? It's really taking away what feeds the fire. But Dustin, I want to pull you into the conversation now, because we learned a lot about fuel reduction after the Steiner Ranch fires. And in fact, your position didn't even exist until after the Steiner Ranch fires. So can you tell us, you know, that you can get really into the weeds, so to speak, with this topic, because there's so many different things that you can do. But with mechanical fuel mitigation, what has Lake Travis Fire Rescue really focused in on as far as mitigating the fuels that feed these wildfires?
So the way that I look at fuels mitigation is similar to hunting. Wildfire is a sort of natural predator in the vegetative ecosystem, and uninhibited by man and man's development, it would maintain these landscapes and overall reduce the fuel loading or the amount of vegetation that's in the area, such that wildfires would be more frequent, but would be much less intense. So part of why we're in the state that we're in today is because the fire service is so effective at extinguishing these fires. So by not having that natural predator in these ecosystems to maintain that equilibrium, we have to go in and institute this mitigation ourselves. So some of the ways that we do that is mechanically. This is going to be in very heavily wooded areas where prescribed fire is not possible or too dangerous. And that's primarily just using chainsaws and chippers. Sometimes we'll burn the brush after we're done with it, but it's very site dependent.
How do
These
we
are all
prioritize those areas, Dustin? Because Bee Cave is full of preserved lands and, you know, tinder trees and cedar and how there's no way, you know, it's like trying to drink the ocean up with a straw, right? How do you prioritize
Yeah.
mitigation efforts?
So some of the key areas that we have targeted is areas that are immediately adjacent to communities, typically within what's known as the home ignition zone, which we'll dive into a little bit more later. But quickly, the around structures, there's multiple zones that sort of define different mitigation measures, and usually on the outer zone of the home ignition zone is where we're doing this fuels mitigation. And kind of the idea is to slow down the fire and reduce the fire behavior overall.
So if someone were to
But
call LTFR and say, I'd like a fuel break in my backyard, can they just order that like a hamburger at a fast food restaurant? How does, like, I want it, I'm willing to pay for it, how do I get it?
I would say not quite. We traditionally only work on public lands. We don't want to be competing with private industry. There's plenty of capable private contractors that are able to do this work. We just want to assist and see as much fuels mitigation as possible. So we'll work with HOAs, the cities such as Bee Cave, but really any public land partner that we have, we're ready and willing to get out there and reduce fuels.
And of course, another kind of strategy, a tool in the toolkit, so to speak, that we have on the government side is code inspections and overgrown vegetation that creates fire hazards as well. One of the questions we got from the community has to do, it's kind of a two-part. The first, it's an enforcement. So Chief, you know, one of the question was, how does LTFR enforce burn bans to prevent burning from happening in whatever jurisdiction
Sure.
it might be happening?
Yeah, so that answer is kind of multifaceted because it depends on the city that you're in. In Bee Cave, control burning through a permit process is approved. The way that works is a resident would go online, fill out the necessary paperwork, go on to Lake Travis LTFR.org, fill out the proper paperwork and LTFR permits, where there's a link on our website. We'll come out, do a quick review of the site, tell you if you qualify for a burn permit or not. There's a very small fee, and then you are listed as having a burn permit should you want to do some controlled burning on your property specific. But that's also subject to bans. If we have a burn ban for anything, that would apply. Even if you do have a permit, you can't burn even during a ban. Or if we decide here at Lake Travis that the winds are not ideal, if it's too windy, even if a ban is not in place, we will issue all burn permit recipients that have the permit a notification that you can't burn today for a number of different reasons that we dictate. So that's how we do it in Bee Cave, very similar to how we do it in the unincorporated areas. Some of the cities do not have ordinance to allow controlled burning. That's by either city charter or resolution. That's a policy issue within that city that they've taken up at some point to decide that. Now, when we get information or a concern that there's a control burn happening, even if it's permitted, we will send a unit out, either an inspector or fire engine, to go assess what's going on to see if it's within the parameters of what's approved. Sometimes we will go out on a permitted site that was not aware that there was a burn banner that we called off burning that day, and we will tell them to extinguish it. And we have very good compliance when we show up. People are willing to work with us. They know and understand the dangers. We have very little issues with people putting out their control burns.
All right. And, you know, the code enforcement also extends to inspections on new buildings. If you're, you know, opening a new business, it may not be the most convenient thing to have to go through, but that's the reason why we have a fire code. It's to prevent fires from the commercial spaces as well. That's a partnership with the city of Bee Cave. There's a lot of overlap between LTFR and the city of Bee Cave working together. And our code enforcement also looks at overgrown lots with vegetation that might create fire hazards. So Mayor, on the city side, what does the enforcement process look like?
Yeah, so our code enforcement team is always out driving around the city, looking at all sorts of things. But this is one of them, overgrown vegetation, things that are a fire hazard. So if a property owner is outside of they're not doing what they need to be doing with their property, they're going to get a letter from our code enforcement team giving them time to correct the situation. Most of the time that takes care of it. If that doesn't happen, there's a system of warnings. Then there's a system of it ends up all the way taking you to court, to municipal court. So our team is pretty on top of things. Sometimes people don't like being told your vegetation's overgrown and you have to cut it back, but it's for the safety of all of us that they're doing that job. And I think it's also important to note that the city, while we can tell a private property owner that they're not in compliance, we don't go out as government and in any capacity and treat private property owners' property. That is the responsibility of the homeowner or the property owner to take care of their own property.
Yeah. And if there is a spot that is raising concern, residents can contact the city. They can let us know, and they can do that through our website by submitting a JOT form. It's called 411, and it is BK 411. So any department that needs to be involved, whether it's parks, whether it's code enforcement, will receive that form, and that can be accessed on the main page of our website. And we'll have a link in the chat that we can drop in to share if you have one on the top of your mind right now. We want to hear about it.
And I actually just went to see if I could find it because I wasn't familiar with that. And if you go to beecavetexas.gov, you can go right there and it says, I want to, and you get a drop down menu of all the things you can do in the city. And it literally says, fill out the 411 JOT form. So really easy to find. And it allows people to be able to say, I have concerns about this property. And if it's missed the eyes of our code enforcement team, which I highly doubt because they're like eagle-eyed hawks, they will go in and check it out.
All right, so this, not surprisingly, is prompting some engagement and some questions that have come in just as we've been talking about this. So we have a question regarding just trying to really focus in on individual safety precautions that homeowners can take to close to their enter and exit roadways to help mitigate risks and optimize public safety. So I think this question has to do with access into and out of neighborhoods, which is actually leading us into our next section about insurance and fire insurance. And I believe, different types of operational strategies, standard operating procedures. I'm learning some new words here. So Chief Abbott, what are the questions that you're hearing from the community about renewal of fire insurance policies and how standard operating procedures are maybe making it harder to get insurance, fire insurance, or it's becoming more expensive?
Sure. Well, the insurance issue is a nationwide issue right now, whether you're dealing with fire, wildland fire, or if you're dealing with flooding in other parts of the nation. Insurance providers are looking at the cost of insuring these homes in areas that either repeatedly flood or repeatedly burn. And that is a known thing. It's been going on for the last 8 to 9 years. Insurance rates have slowly started to trickle up. In the last 3 years, with all the natural disasters that we've had on the West Coast, the East Coast, and in between with wildland fires, insurance companies have chosen to either elevate their premiums to a point where they're more expensive than the mortgage in some cases, or simply not renew at the end of the policy cycle or the policy term. We have not been notified of any mid-policy term cancellations. There is a process for that. It's very rare that an insurance company will drop you mid-policy, but they will give notice towards the end of the policy that they're not planning to renew it. Or if they do renew it, it's going to come at a steeper price with the premiums. We're seeing it throughout the nation. Specific to this community, we definitely are seeing this where a lot of homeowners are having to go out and get specialized insurance plans through large companies that specialize in insurance policies up and down the West Coast specifically. I won't name any by name, only because we don't endorse one or the other, but they're definitely out there. And we've heard from some real estate agents who come to the table to close on a house that given day, and the insurance rates come back, and it's in some cases it could be a deal breaker. What we want the community to know is, one, we are here to help wherever we can in this situation. We don't write the policies. Obviously, we have very little influence in what the policy will be. What we can do is provide a good fire service, and that is rated under the Insurance Services Office, or ISO, and they assign our area an ISO rating. The city of Bee Cave proper has a very good low ISO rating of a class 2. I think it's very important that people understand the insurance rating before all of these increases to insurance was still very low. What they're also now looking at is they have access to a lot more data than they did 10 years ago about the risk that is in our community. And they're looking at the evaluation of the homes and the insurable loss and risk. And they're using that as a driving force to determine the premiums. If you were to call up an insurance agent today, they could easily go on Google and look at your house from the street and kind of give you an assessment of whether or not they're going to be able to provide you a cost-effective policy or not, looking at where your community is, in addition to all the other technology that they have access to using AI and other information to get this data. The other thing that we're seeing as well is areas that have limited access. So we talked earlier about the fire codes and the importance of fire codes. And a lot of these communities were built before fire codes existed in the city or in the unincorporated area. That being said, things that they used to say, well, you have a little trail that if you needed to get out, you could get out, use the little trail. Those aren't legitimate anymore. What they're looking for are legitimate ways of in and out of roads or access points that can withstand weather, that can withstand a lot of traffic, and that are accessible, whether they're gated when there's not an emergency and the gates open during an emergency. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but they're looking for legitimate access and egress points that some of these communities, based on how they are designed from 50 years ago, or the community around them has grown up to a point where they've limited options where they could put a street. These are things that we're seeing insurance companies say, hey, we are not unfortunately going to be able to insure your property after the term's up, or it's going to be at a very elevated rate. What we will do, you may want, if you fit into this category or have questions about it, we'd love to chat with you. We also say that every individual homeowner has a slightly different situation depending if you're in different communities from one to another. What may work in Ladera may not work in other areas of Bee Cave. And everybody has a unique risk profile depending on when the community was built, based on if it was built to fire codes or not. We can and will be willing to waive some fees because there's usually a fee associated with it, but we can draft a letter illustrating all this to that you can use when you're shopping for insurance, because there are times that we find the insurance providers have not updated their databases of all the ISO ratings. So you may be in an area that has an old ISO rating from back before 2006, and it's improved since then, but they don't have it in their database, and they're going to want proof from the fire department. Just saying that you're 1 mile from the fire station and within 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant is not going to cut it. They want something from the fire department to say this is what the ISO is for that particular parcel of land or a house. And we can do that. We've done it often, so it's not something that we can get you a letter within a couple days. Now, if we have a large input for letters, it may take a week or two to get a letter. If we have a lot of people want this now, but we'll work through it. And we'll work with property owners to see that we're maximizing every tool that we have available to try to keep their property insurance premiums as low as they can as it results to wildfire or risk. There are things that are outside of our control that we don't have the authority to step on the property and to handle through fire codes. That's really individual property owner's responsibility. We will guide them. We have free home ignition risk assessments that Dustin can do and his team can do, in addition to other programs we can offer the communities. But keep in mind that every community, even if it's within the same city, may have unique needs that require different tools.
So what I'm hearing you say, though, is that you shop around, you can get a letter from LTFR that will help improve your chances of getting the policy that you need. And then there's an individual obligation and responsibility to maintain your property in a way that will reduce risks. And so I want to transition to the next section here about defensible space, because this really has to be a team effort. You talked about public property, city right of way, public land is where LTFR and the city has some jurisdiction, but on private property, that's up to the individual property owners, and creating defensible space is a key part of making that happen. So Dustin, what's the easiest way for someone to create defensible space around their home? Are they gonna have to chop down all their trees in order to get defensible space?
Not necessarily. So that picture on the left is a very good example. There are still plenty of trees that are on that property. They're just spaced out a little bit more. They're pruned up a little bit. So the defensible space, the key thing that we're looking at is the continuity of fuel sources. So that's primarily going to be vegetation, but it could also include your outbuildings and decks and things like that. So in this area, we're looking for that, reducing the vertical continuity of vegetation. We're limbing up those trees, reducing any potential what's called ladder fuels that could allow the fire to climb up into the canopy of the trees. And then that horizontal spacing so that the radiant heat from this vegetation potentially catching fire would have a reduced impact on the other vegetation that's around it. Other than defensible space, the structure itself is extremely critical in all of this. You'll see that zone 1 is the structure itself in the first 5 feet. If the structure has materials on the outside of the structure that are combustible, that could burn, that is an issue. The primary way that these wildfires are moving through communities is through embers being lobbed potentially long distances and landing on the structure or the immediate area around the structure, finding a potential very available fuel source, getting that initial fire started, and then potentially carrying on to other fuel sources. So we're trying to reduce that continuity of fuel.
Dustin,
if
we got
those
some
embers-
questions about fuel breaks. And so what should a homeowner do if they've got overgrown vegetation? Like maybe they butt up to a green belt, let's say, but their homeowners association won't allow for a fire break, or it won't allow the individual homeowner to do it. So they're limited essentially. I know that the structure itself and what's immediately close to it is the most important thing, but do you have any advice for homeowners who want a fuel break, who butt up against a green belt, but they don't have immediate control over that green belt behind them?
Well, I would say that a key factor in all of this is the sort of social cultural aspect, with our communities being built densely packed with all of our homes next to each other, and then the HOA owned land potentially, or city land, or whoever may own that land on the other side of the fence, that we need to come together as a community and have a conversation about it. We need to figure out what we value most and work towards finding a common ground. I think that fuels mitigation in that zone 3 can be tricky. a lot of times these dense woodlands are actually providing protection from wildfires. Anybody who has created a campfire and put a freshly cut log onto that fire will know that it's really difficult to get that fresh cut wood to burn. So in most cases, those trees are providing protection from wildfires, from the more readily available fuels that could grow there. So it's kind of a balancing act that needs to take place of how much vegetation is taken out, how it's taken out. You know, the prescription that we follow is U.S. Fish and Wildlife guideline, because some of the areas that we work in is golden cheek warbler habitat, and that's an endangered habitat. So you could be, if you're going on the other side of the fence, you could be getting into that habitat. So a calm, collected approach with with fuels mitigation needs to be taken. But for sure, the biggest bang for your buck is going to be spent in zone 1 first, and then zone 2, and then working out from there. I
So working
want to keep
together,
stressing
the social cultural component, you know, and working together with the city, with LTFR, which is essentially our fire department, right? That, I mean, LTFR is the
Yeah.
city of Bee Cave's fire department. So if a homeowners association invites LTFR and the city of Bee Cave, we're going to help, right? And I know, I mean, I've been with the
Absolutely.
city for about 9 months, but I know that this has happened in the past already with neighborhoods, but it's got to be neighborhood by neighborhood because of the distinct needs of each of those communities.
Mhm.
So, all right. So moving on to, I just wanted to share this slide as a reminder of what a difference it is. Hard work. It is bringing people together, and it's figuring out how to pay for it, and it's figuring out how to maintain it over a long term. But this is why, this is why it's worth it. So this is a real house in Washington State from 2012 that survived a wildfire. And I'm sure there were very well-trained firefighters in the area, but the reality is with this particular house, it wasn't saved by a firefighter. It was saved because of the way the defensible space was set up. And Dustin, I know you can speak to that better than I can, but what stands out immediately when you look at this house in this picture? Why is it still standing?
Well, just a cursory glance, the structure appears to have very quality materials that's on the exterior of the structure, and the materials appear to be in a highly maintained state. So the two key words I really want everybody to take home with them tonight is materials and maintenance. If you have more highly durable materials that are non-combustible, you don't have to maintain as much to hold a good fire protective standard. If you're choosing less durable materials, potentially combustible materials, that maintenance interval needs to increase significantly to match those sort of more durable materials. So it seems to be a very well-maintained home. It looked like there weren't any combustible materials directly touching the structure. So some of the bushes that we have in front of our windows, in our front yards, I'm not seeing that there. There's a good spacing between where the structure ends and where the vegetation begins. There's also not a lot of dense vegetation around the structure, mostly just grasses and some small shrubs. So that's generally going to have that reduced fire behavior overall. And less embers are being generated that could land on the structure or be pulled into the structure through possibly the vents that
So,
could start a fire on the inside.
on the maintenance side, we have this slide here that gives some visual aids. And you talked about high quality materials. I was mayor. I had to replace the mulch underneath our trampoline in our backyard. But I said, wait, no, Dustin said mulch, that's combustible. And so I did pea gravel instead. and it was no additional cost. I was going to have to do this maintenance anyway, but I chose a material that was not combustible. Mayor, is this something that you've seen? There's some easy and expensive ways to do this. You don't have to spend a fortune.
That's right. And I mean, I think I remember it was maybe what, 2 years ago, Chief, you guys did the video on how mulch can spontaneously combust in high temperatures. And that was a learning experience for me. I didn't know that. And that was very alarming because I always thought mulch made our flower beds look nice. It was, it decomposes, it was good fertilizer. And so I was going all along with that and didn't realize I could have a fire hazard placed right up against my house. So it's highly recommended that wood mulch is replaced with pea gravel or small rocks, that people screen all their roof vents so that embers and stuff can't blow into those vents. And then, we have we're in oak season right now. So the oak trees are shedding their leaves and those leaves are coming down and getting in gutters. Well, as we know, that is a fire tinder and that can start a fire right next to our homes. And so we don't often think about the little things that we have that are touching our houses that are actually fully combustible fuel.
Yeah, tree trimming, getting those branches off the house, getting the gutters cleaned out. This has been really eye-opening, right?
Mhm.
Just getting to hear directly from the experts about what
I was walking my dog today, just took her out on a walk in this beautiful day that we had in the sunshine. And I was just looking around because I've been having these conversations now with Chief and Dustin for over a month. And so now I'm looking at things in a different way than I looked at them before. There's a lot of people that have tree limbs touching their roofs, or right up, pushing right up against their house. So they're not just, we get busy in our day-to-day lives. We're taking care of our kids. We're, working and doing all things, but we don't step back and take a look at our property and go, what do I need to do to clear fire hazards away from my home? And I think that's, we wanted to time this Facebook Live as we head into spring and we're all starting to come outside again and the weather's nice, it's not too hot, and we can do that yard work around the house. And it's nice and makes our homes look good to plant flowers and to trim our bushes, and that's important, but it's also important to take a look at fireproofing your home.
So the screen all roof vents, this was a new one for me. And it's all roofs have to ventilate air somehow, but embers can get inside and then you have a fire in your roof. Would you say that screening all roof vents is a relatively inexpensive way to protect your home, Dustin?
Potentially, again, it depends on your structure and its unique features. But in most cases, it's just a roll of wire mesh and maybe a little bit of crawling around in the attic to get to those E-vents. Other vents to look at that are important, gable vents. You'll see them at the peaks of your roof. Right here, sometimes there'll be a decorative circle or square or something like that, or even just a triangle at the top. Those are very large vents that can bring the embers inside, and the dryer vent as well. Really a critical part of your home, not just for wildfire, but for internal structure fires as well. Keeping that regularly cleaned out is a huge thing to do to help protect your home from fire. And a lot of times those dryer vents are plastic. They're just a single flap, a loose flap that could be stuck open, possibly with the dryer lint that's in there. So replacing those with something more substantial, metal that can seal more times than not would certainly be a good way to go, because those plastic ones with enough heat, they can just melt right off, and then you've got a giant hole that's leading into your structure and most likely has good kindling inside of there that can really get that fire started.
That's a good one. I hadn't thought about that one. Now, just like there's rules against, in some homeowners associations, they don't allow clearing of land, there's also landscaping restrictions. So my example about replacing mulch with gravel, that might be easier said than done. So Mayor, does the city have control over homeowners association rules?
We don't have control over homeowner association rules, but we can work with them. And most of our homeowner associations, well, all of them are, we are in good communication. We don't know, right? So if someone can, if you contact your HOA and just, say, hey, we learned on this Firewise Facebook Live these things, and they say, no, we're not going to change it. You can reach out to me. I am happy to have a conversation with any HOA. We have just not had that problem in BK. We're very neighborly. In most cases, it's literally just because HOAs are run by working families too, and parents. It's a volunteer role, and it's just the new and updated guidelines have just kind of slipped by them. It's not something being done on purpose. It's just stuff that nobody's thinking about. It hasn't happened here in Bee Cave yet. Knock on wood, we're very lucky. And so it just hasn't happened for us. And so in some cases, it's just not top of mind. So we're happy to open that door of communication, give them a list of kind of updated guidelines. These are things that you may want to update in your HOA guidelines. And a lot of times those conversations are that quick and that simple to have. But, they're easy ones to have. We just don't know to have them if someone doesn't ask us to.
Another question that came in has to do with how do we notify the city that we need to have this conversation, or that we're having an issue with the HOA and that we want to have. So again, that's the JOT form, the BK 411. That is a catch-all. So any question or issue that is getting seen by real people and is getting directed to the correct department. So definitely utilize that JOT form, or you can call the main phone number for the city, and that will also get routed to the correct department. All right, lots of questions coming in. I just want to kind of go through a couple success stories, and then I will go to the chat and we will go through and make sure that each one of these, we're doing great on time. But I do want to highlight the work that has gone into fuel mitigation and some of the innovative strategies that the city as well as LTFR have implemented. Chief Abbott, can you talk about some of these more quantifiable success stories as far as fuel mitigation and investments made?
Sure. Over the many years since Wildfire has really became an issue in our community, we have increased our staffing levels on our fire trucks. We have one of the highest staffing levels that's possible, that we can afford. That ranks us up there with a very good low insurance rating. A lot of that is really a testament to the hardworking firefighters that we have in the field that keep the fires that do happen small. I don't want anybody to leave today thinking we don't have fires. We have fires, but we have a significant suppression force that is well trained and well equipped to handle the job professionally and keep those fires small when they do happen. So I want to highlight that, because that is a huge risk reduction, and you get effectively credit through a low insurance rate. While the policy premiums may be high, the rate is low as a result of the fire suppression efforts that you pay through your taxes. In addition to that, we have the Wild Fuel Risk Reduction Program that is now going into year, I think, 12. That started as a pilot program. Dustin Dunn's position is a cost share position with the city of Lakeway on that, and we share some of that as the district. He's a district employee in addition to the wildfire mitigation team. That is a full-time team now from initially a pilot. It's around year-round. They go into the targeted areas, as we mentioned. We incorporated goats in the Stana Ranch community. There are a few people, I think, watching this right now from the Stana Ranch community. That is a community that came together, put together a audacious and very, very example-setting Firewise program. If you want to see how Firewise works as far as your community and the community-led programs that we can help support, check in with Steiner Ranch, and we can make those connections. Spanish Oaks was a Firewise community for a while as well. The insurance rating, communication, these kind of engagement with the community to let them know what the risk is. Some people are surprised. There's a lot of people that have not lived in our community when we had the Steiner Ranch and the Bastrop and the Spicewood fires. We talked about the fires of 2011, and they have no understanding of what we're talking about because they didn't live here. So it's important for us to keep this on the threshold of the community's mind, because during the blue skies, as we call blue skies, when there's not a lot of things going on that's bad, or we don't have such a high risk at the moment, these are the times to do a phased approach to mitigating the risk at your home, for example. What we talked about today may sound kind of huge to try to do around your property, but if you do it in phases, you can do it. And if you do it under direction, free direction, even that, through the fire department and some of the other programs we have, we can help you put together a plan that works for your home, works for your budget, and will take giant steps into reducing the risk. So over the years, Wahida did a great report a couple weeks ago, and it's the Tri-City report on all the things that have been happening in and around the Tri-Cities, BK being one of those cities. And we encourage people to go read that report because there's a lot of things that she captured in that report. We're just not going to have time today to cover, but it's basically all the years leading up to today and all the work that's been done in and outside of the city and the unincorporated areas to keep us safe. And it's in excess of $8 million easily. So your money is being put to use. And we do have a lot of success stories to show for that. When we had the storms, for example, the winter storms, we used the winter storms as an example of things that we did with the wildfire crew and some of the firefighters because of all the dead and down debris that we had because of the storm. Had we left those in those areas and we didn't have coordination with the cities, our fire risk today would be off the charts. It's not great right now, but it could have been a lot worse had we not taken those efforts during the winter storms to collect that down and dead debris and do something with it. So I applaud everybody that was involved with that. It just wasn't one city over another. It was truly a community effort to get that done. So thank you for all the support that people did. And I have to commend the residents. Residents stepped up like they always do. And they really took that and owned a lot of their own property issues themselves and helped us with that. That was a huge ask and big lift on a lot of people's part. So thank you.
Yeah, we've proven we can do it.
Yeah. Chief, can you just touch on real quick, if a neighborhood wants to become a Firewise community, and I have to imagine that would help with their homeowner's insurance or their fire insurance a little bit, how do they do that?
Reach out to us, and what we can do is we can set up a conversation. We'll come out in person, or if times, schedules don't provide that, we can do it at night during Zoom if it's easier for communities. But Firewise is very much grassroots driven, community driven. It's not the fire department coming doing it for you. It's not even the city coming to do it for you. While we will help and we have resources, it's truly a community program. So it requires a little leadership from the community. And I know there's a lot of leaders out there listening to this. If you're looking to want to start a program, you can start small and grow from that. There's no size too small, too big for Firewise. And the fire department and the cities will help in that effort. So just contact us through our website, contact Dustin, and we can get things started for you.
And we have a link that we can drop in. I think we've already dropped it into the chat about scheduling those fire assessments of your home. And you can just immediately schedule that. Dustin has been getting a lot of those calls, as you can imagine, and emails since January and the fires that happened in California. But there is an easy way to get that scheduled, and we will drop that link into the chat for folks who want to see it.
And can I just comment too that we as a city, and I'll talk about just the city of BK and what we've been doing. Everybody loved the goats in Central Park. They were fun to watch. They're very cute. But it was really there to remove that dead vegetation and make our city parks safer. I think we were the first in the area to do it, and everyone saw it. They're very inexpensive. They're very easy to do. All of our neighborhoods, all of them in the city of Bee Cave are surrounded by some sort of park, conservation land, wooded areas. They every single one of them. Some of them have more trees and vegetation in them than others. And if you are in one of those neighborhoods, your HOA can very inexpensively get a trailer of goats and have brought in, and they'll clear that area. I know many of you have seen the work that was done in City Park. The before and after photos were incredible of what these goats can just come in and clear that underbrush right out quickly, cheaply. And, we're keeping the goats alive and feeding them. So I'm really thinking I could rewind the clock a few years and get a goat business. I'd be doing great right now.
They've become very popular. It's sustainable, and it is very affordable. And the city is, I spoke with the Parks and Facilities Department. They want to bring them back and make it an annual thing, not a one-off thing. So putting those plans in place.
And I also want to give a shout out to our cleanup crew in the Friends of the Park that come out on the Saturdays of every month, and they're slowly making their way with human labor, going out, they're partnering with groups like Young Men's Service League and different Cub Scouts and different groups and organizations that need service hours. And they're going in and doing that hard labor of pulling underbrush and cleaning those twigs out. I know they've been working in the Primitive Park recently, and I just want to take a minute to thank those volunteers, because that's also, they're just getting out there and doing all that hard work for those of us in the community. And so thank you very much for that.
And Friends of the Park, it's a reoccurring volunteer opportunity. It's, I think it's the
Second
second
Saturday.
Saturday of every month. And they provide the equipment and you can get in there, and it's that social, community, cultural connection of getting in there.
And
together.
manual labor.
And a lot of manual labor. Yes. All right. So we also wanted to talk about the coordination between the city of Bee Cave and LTFR with respect to a proposed public safety building. So this is going to be on the ballot May 3rd. Early voting will start before that. This is a current rendering of what that joint space would look like. Chief Abbott, could you just share a few words with us about how being in the same building with the city of Bee Cave Police and LTFR, how that will impact service and coordination efforts?
We've always maintained an excellent working relationship with BKPD, and I think this is a true testament to that. Over the time, we've had a lot of shared needs. The police department has grown, the fire department has grown, and we've both have outgrown our current facilities. And I know, speaking on behalf of the fire department or Lake Travis Fire Rescue, we are at capacity in the city of Bee Cave. If we want to add more units, which we do in the future, we're not going to have any space to do it. And so we reached out to the city. We said, hey, we're going to have to look for additional sites. The city was already in the process of, talking about the future concept of what additional or a new police station would be. We were able to start having a discussion together. There's definitely some cost savings that go into this as well, because we're joining this and some of the bill costs in concept. It's proposed to have a shared fitness area to where both the firefighters and the police officers can work out, and also a shared area for training rooms and conference rooms. That way we can, train together, because we do run a lot of calls together every day, in addition to one-off trainings that the PD may need to have, or we have, or one or the other. And also it serves as a focal point for the community to come together with both public safety elements that represent the community as a whole. And you can stop by and see the firefighters and also stop by and see the police officers. Obviously, there's a very healthy rivalry between everybody there, and it's always in fun. But I think it's a true testament to what I know the chiefs, the associations, the labor associations, and all of our bosses would like to see. We're doing a lot of cross-pollination on this.
Yeah. And I think, I was just answering a question about that with somebody today in the community, and I said, you can measure, the data point will give you the cost savings. The data point will show you how we split the land, the cost of the land. The data point will show you how we're sharing the training rooms and the training facility and the workout space and what that saves. What you can't measure is the relationship building that comes from the fire department and the police department spending time together in the same building, and then what that does when they're out on a call together. When you work closely with someone and you learn to read their body language and you learn to read how they're going to respond to stress and how they're going to respond in a situation, you then alter your response to do that same thing. And so by them getting to spend that time together, they're going to go out and I believe they're going to serve the community better when the community has to make that 911 call.
So planning for the future, this building definitely allows both agencies to do that.
And for Bee Cave residents, this will be on their ballot to approve in May.
Yes, and if there are questions that are about this project, you can still submit those again. I'm going to say it again, Mayor, BK 411, we're monitoring that. So finally, as far as the prepared portion of all this, I wanted to make sure everybody knew what steps they could take. Because this is everybody working together, from the city to the LTFR to individual residents. So schedule that free wildfire assessment. The link is in the chat to do that through LTFR. We, of course, implementing what those recommendations are. That's the next important piece of that assessment. We also know that HOAs and neighborhoods, there's a lot that can be done in that space with the framework that the Firewise community provides. And so we want to encourage communities to work together. City, LTFR want to help support that as well. And finally, reporting those fire hazards to BK 411. So our code enforcement and LTFR can work together on that. So those are the actions everybody can do after this is over.
Yeah. And real briefly, Chief, just to kind of highlight for everyone a conversation that you and I had that we kind of didn't touch on today. We focused a lot about if you're surrounded by woods, but when we watched the California wildfires, that was spreading from home to home to home. And those were extremely devastating. And we don't think about the danger of fire passing home to home to home. So can you just kind of, kind of reiterate for everyone what you and I have talked about as far as what to do to prevent that from happening?
Sure. And it's an excellent, example of why every neighborhood needs to have a specific risk assessment assigned to them. Because while you may have a community where the homes are 10 to 15 feet from each other, you may have others where they're on larger home sites and they're separated, their buildings are separated, their land's touched, but they're hundreds of feet away, if not even further away from each other. But in the case where you have homes that are closely located next to each other, there comes a point in time when one house lights off or two houses light off, and then it's a domino effect. And some of the things that go into those kind of risk reductions are different than somebody who's on a 1 acre home site. And things like fencing, things like landscaping, but also things Dustin had mentioned, the eaves, what the building construction is made out of. Do you have facade? Do you have stucco, brick, or in a lot of cases stone in this case? And there comes a point when if you have 4 or 5 homes going up at one time, it's gonna probably take the whole street, as we saw in the Palisades as an example. Those are home to home ignitions. It didn't matter if there was a tree in between them. It was the home that was starting the other homes on fire. So again, different tools for different communities, and that's where we can come in and help the community look at what they have and what they're working with and what that future and planned out mitigation program would look like. The good thing is a lot of people in this community take care of their homes. Their homes are newly built or fairly newly built. A lot of them do have good facades on the outside that are hardened, either cement or stucco or limestone in a lot of cases. We do see homes that have metal roofs or stucco or tile roofs, which is good, and also a stucco side or limestone. But the eaves in between are actually flammable. Like they're only using wood or compressed wood, one or the other. So there's a little bit of a weak point in there. We know it's not realistic to ask everybody to go change out their roofs, their siding, and all their eaves. But if you have maintenance coming up and you're going to have some other work that you're going to have to do, now is a great time to start looking at what that looks like. And you can start budgeting for it. You can start planning for it. So what you wouldn't want to do is have a project that's pretty significant in size because you're replacing a roof or something, and then have to come back a couple of years later to replace rotten wood on your eaves that you'd have to do either way, and then put back another flammable material. You have an opportunity at this point to do something like a hardy plank or something that's more hardened. So again, every community is slightly different in what their needs are, and we want to work with all the HOAs. A lot of this is policy. I'm an HOA president in my little neighborhood on the other side of the town, and we've had this discussion many of times. Is our old, outdated, basically declarant. It was a declarant who put together the deed restrictions for our neighborhood. They weren't really thinking about these things. They were all about St. Augustine, and everything they put in there is highly flammable, only cedar fences and nothing else, and all this other stuff. So we took time to work through that, and we looked at what's the bigger risk on this, and we've gotten through it. The fire department, like the city, we can provide some sample language for HOAs if they're looking one specific thing over another. And we want to be an advocate and a help to the community. So do reach out to us, see what we can do for you. This is the beginning of many discussions, I assume.
It is, and I want to make sure everybody knows that we are recording this so that if someone missed this, there'll be an opportunity to see it in the future. We'll have that on the calendar side, March 12th. So there'll be a link to this recording as well as these slides for anyone who missed this. We're coming up with, it's 7 o'clock, and we told everyone it would be 7 o'clock from 6 to 7. But I just wanted to reiterate, evacuations, because that is something that I think is such a stress-inducing idea. And if you think about it and have a plan, then it doesn't have to be as stressful or as anxiety-producing. So, Mayor, what's the message? What would you like to reiterate about evacuations to our community?
So I talk about it frequently. We have a lot of animals in our house. I have more animals than kids. And they are like my kids. And so, my biggest nightmare is I'm out of the house and there's an evacuation notice in my neighborhood and my children and my pets are still in my home. That is a very scary situation. And I think for any parent, we're going to go back in while the fire department's telling us to get out. So, Chief, what do you tell parents in that situation?
Be prepared to evacuate. And that preparation starts when you don't have to evacuate. So blue sky. So think about all the downtime you have. And I know everybody's busy nowadays with everything going on, but if you have some downtime, truly prepare for an evacuation. Have a ready-go bag, especially if you have little kids or if you have elderly parents that are living with you, even if they're just visiting, they may have special needs. There's a lot of things that you have to consider should you need to pick up and go if you are at the house. If you are outside your house, and let's say you're at the Galleria and you got a message that they're evacuating an area and you have loved ones at home that don't have a car, they can't evacuate. You want to have a plan established if you can't get back in for whatever reason. And because we got to think about if there's an evacuation to a specific area, they're trying to get out as resources and fire units and emergency response and everything else is trying to get in. So it's got to be very coordinated. And you really don't have a whole lot of time in some cases to get everything that you think you're going to need in your home. So get ready for an evacuation. It's not something that you want to think you're going to do, but it's important to have the necessary things like chargers, cords for your cell phone so you can stay in communication. Medications are huge. There's a lot of people who can't go without, a couple hours without certain medications. So be prepared if you need to run out of the house to grab those things. And there's a long checklist of things. We can work with neighborhoods and individuals one-on-one if they have a special needs family member that may have very unique things. Maybe they're on some form of oxygen or they're on some type of breathing machine that's dependent. So there's a lot of things that we can do one-on-one with individual homeowners to help them prepare and work out a plan that works for them. In addition to the notifications are huge. Staying up on the notifications is huge. And we can't emphasize that enough. Is Voyant and Warren Central Texas. And those are powerful systems, and they will give you updates as well of what's going on when there's a situation like that.
Trying to get back in to save those pets or loved ones, like you're not going to be very successful doing it in the first place. So having like a trusted neighbor that you could call, having that plan set up to know if I'm not there, there's somebody else who's still inside who knows, pick up the pets, pick up the elderly, and then get out along with the flow of traffic. Otherwise, you are impeding the efforts to protect and save property.
And we can't have the evacuation discussion with also emphasizing the need to ensure that if you have a defensible space at your home, it may come as an order that we're ordering people to shelter in place. We're not ordering an evacuation, depending on the topic. Obviously, tonight's discussion is wildland. But if there was ever a hazmat call in the neighborhood dealing with a chemical release or any kind of other situation where we don't want people coming outside, we want them to stay in their homes where they're better protected. They have the resources they need and the utilities they need. Getting back on the street and going to other places creates an issue for a lot of people, a lot of demand. So if we're going to have the discussion about evacuation, which is very important, and we have to spend as much time having the discussion on hardening our homes, being prepared to stay in our homes for longer periods of time. And their winter storms would be an excellent example of why you would also want to make sure that your habitat, your homestead, or wherever you live in an apartment, if you needed to stay there for a couple of days, like in the case of the winter storms that we had, you could do that. And I know we had utility issues and we all lived through it. We get it. We learned a lot from that. But that is an example of it may not always come in form of evacuation order, but a shelter in place order. And you got to be prepared for that as well. And we can help you.
That's such an important point. Well, I think we have maybe an idea for our next Facebook Live Q&A. All right. Well, thank you very much, Chief Abbott and Dustin Dunn. We so appreciate your hard work and commitment to supporting this community. Thank you, Mayor King. And again, thank you to everybody at home for participating. We want to hear from you. We want to continue to work and partner with the community. So have a great evening and we'll talk soon.
All right, thank you.